The reality you're experiencing isn't being shaped by your desires. It's being shaped by the version of you that's doing the observing. Right now, you may think you're choosing your path. You may believe you're manifesting your goals, setting your intentions, and calling in outcomes through force of will or clarity of thought. But behind all of that, beneath the affirmations, the vision boards, and the mental rehearsals, there's a deeper mechanism at work. A mechanism that isn't based on what you want. It's based on what you are. More specifically, what part of you is observing this entire process? This isn't a metaphysical theory. It's grounded in one of the most shocking insights of modern physics. Observation resolves probabilities into actual outcomes. Not attraction, not wishful thinking, not sheer effort. The observer doesn't just watch the world. It defines which version of the world becomes real. And here's the part that almost no one is talking about, because most of the personal development world is still stuck in motivational thinking, bypassing the actual mechanics of reality resolution. The observer isn't neutral. The observer carries a frequency, an identity, a specific structure of belief, expectation, resonance, and narrative. And this structure isn't just coloring your experience. It's selecting which timeline becomes available to you. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You're not just failing to manifest because your thoughts aren't focused enough, or your emotions aren't high vibe enough. You're failing because the you doing the observing is wired for a completely different outcome than the one you claim to want. So today, we go past pop spirituality. We go past vague ideas of attraction, alignment, and manifestation. We go past the illusion that you can keep your identity intact while trying to leap into a new reality. Instead, we'll explore a frontier that few dare to approach with clarity. Quantum identity engineering. This is the precise art of rewiring the observer within you, because only by changing who's watching can you transform what collapses into form. We're going to challenge the foundational myth that your identity is stable, fixed, or even real in the way you think. And you'll discover that your self isn't a source of reality. It's the lens through which your version of reality gets chosen. Across this experience, we'll unpack 3 extremely subtle but massively powerful identity shifts. They're not obvious. They don't look like traditional mindset upgrades, and they're not easy to fake. But once these identity shifts occur, your field changes. You stop projecting incongruent energy. You stop creating feedback loops that reinforce your past. You stop seeking and start selecting. Before we go into these hidden shifts, though, we must first pull the curtain back on a core illusion, the very idea that you are one unified, fixed self doing the observing in the first place. So next, we uncover the trap of the static self and why clinging to it may be the reason your quantum potential keeps looping into limitation. The you doing the manifesting may not even be real. It's comforting to believe in a stable self, a consistent identity, something we can anchor to when the world feels chaotic. But that very comfort is the problem. You are not a single, stable you. What you think of as yourself is a probabilistic pattern, a fluid set of memories, preferences, emotional reactions, and internal narratives that coalesce long enough to form what seems like a cohesive personality. But underneath that cohesion lies uncertainty, fluctuation, multiplicity. The idea of a static self isn't just a philosophical flaw, it's a practical one. Because when you try to manifest or create from a self that you believe is fixed, you unwittingly reinforce all the patterns that come with it. Every thought, every action, every emotional response loops back into the same structure. You end up trapped in a timeline where your old self is constantly selecting your new outcomes. Let's make this clear. Identity isn't a source, it's a lens. And when the lens is dirty, distorted, or outdated, no matter how much effort you apply, the outcomes stay misaligned. Let's move into what that actually means. You are not observing the world as a neutral being. You are observing the world through a highly specific filter. That filter is shaped by layers. The stories you believe about yourself, the roles you've accepted or rejected, the emotional set points you've normalized, the unconscious agreements you've made with your environment. And each of these layers emits a signal, not metaphorically, energetically. That signal either opens timelines or collapses them out of reach. This is why people can use the same methods, affirmations, visualizations, scripting, and get radically different results. Because the method is irrelevant if the observer behind the method is misaligned. This brings us to a crucial realization. You are not the doer. You are not the attractor. You are not even the thinker. You are the collapser of potentials. You resolve the infinite into the actual. But the mechanism through which that resolution happens is not your conscious desire. It's your energetic configuration. And that configuration is determined by the version of you that's currently observing. So let's examine that version. Start by asking, who am I being when I set my intentions? What version of me is speaking when I visualize success? Is it a version that expects reality to match it? Or one that hopes to escape the current loop? Most people try to create from what could be called the achievement self. This is the version of them that believes effort, positivity, or consistency will eventually lead to breakthrough. But this self is still entangled with the identity that lacks what is being sought. It is inherently dependent on a timeline that doesn't yet exist. Which means it's not the selector, it's the seeker. And seekers never collapse outcomes. They chase probabilities. Now let's go deeper into the fluidity of the self. Every time you shift your emotional state, you shift your self-state. Every time you adopt a new belief, even temporarily, you enter a new identity configuration. Every micro-moment of awareness is actually a convergence of possibilities being narrowed by your internal tuning. So the question becomes, why are you trying to upgrade your thoughts without upgrading the you that's doing the thinking? It's like tuning a radio by moving the antenna instead of the dial. Pointless, because the identity is the dial. If you don't shift that, you're just broadcasting noise to a field that's waiting for coherence. The illusion of a static self is seductive. It tells you that you can add transformation onto who you already are. But true quantum shift doesn't add, it replaces. You collapse one version of yourself by observing from a new one. That's the core mechanic. Not wishful thinking, not elevated emotions, not repetition, precision, resonance, identity replacement. This is why so many never break free, because they are clinging to the idea that they, as they are, can somehow bend reality. But the truth is, reality bends only to observers that match its frequency. And your current self may not be qualified to receive the outcome you desire, not because it's wrong, but because it's incompatible. So here's what we've just exposed. You're not a fixed being. You're a field, a configuration, a dynamic waveform of identity traits, some of which contradict and some of which cohere. The more coherent your internal pattern, the stronger your ability to collapse potential into reality. The more fragmented your identity, the more scattered your signal becomes. This is not philosophy, it's mechanics. And now that you understand that yourself is not a singular source, but a mutable filter, we can now begin exploring how reality changes not when you want something different, but when a different you begins to observe the field. Next, we'll explore a scientific revelation that has rocked the foundations of how we understand perception and outcome, and why the quality of the observer is not just important. It's everything. Science says observation changes reality. But the quality of that observation is the missing key. In quantum physics, observation is not a passive act. It's not merely seeing, noting, or becoming aware of something. Observation, in the quantum sense, means interaction with a field of probability in a way that collapses uncertainty into outcome. That alone is a monumental idea. But here's where it becomes life-altering. The identity of the observer directly influences the outcome selected. You're not just watching your life unfold. You're narrowing a range of possibilities into a single timeline by the structure of the consciousness that is doing the observing. This isn't poetic metaphor. It's the foundation of the double-slit experiment, one of the most famous and unsettling findings in all of science. A particle exists in a wave of potential states, but the moment it is measured, observed, it collapses into a single state. The act of being witnessed changes its form. But here's where the mainstream explanation stops short, and where we push deeper. Because we're not interested in repeating basic science facts. We're interested in using this as a map for reality configuration. The double-slit experiment isn't just about particles. It's a mirror to your mind. You don't live in one objective timeline. You live in a superposition, a field of many potential realities, and which one stabilizes into realness depends not on your actions, but on the state of consciousness you hold while observing it. Here's the distinction almost no one makes. Observation isn't neutral. The mainstream explanation treats the observer as a blank entity that simply causes collapse. But this is where personal evolution enters the equation. Because the observer you are, your thoughts, your expectations, your vibrational consistency, influences what gets collapsed. An untrained observer may collapse chaos. A reactive observer may collapse repetition. A self-aware observer may collapse novelty, transformation, acceleration. This is why two people can encounter the same external event and have completely different outcomes. One collapses a pattern of defeat. The other collapses a timeline of breakthrough. They didn't attract different realities. They resolve them differently through the lens of their internal observer structure. Now let's go even deeper. Think of reality as a probabilistic ocean. At any given moment, there are waves of potential timelines all around you. Paths you could walk, events that could occur, people you could become. But these don't manifest because you wrote them in a journal. They don't become solid because you visualized them 10 times. They become real because the quality of your observer state matched that specific wave. That's resonance. And resonance resolves reality. So the key question becomes, what is the structure of your observer right now? Is it stable? Is it reactive? Is it coherent? Is it entangled with old expectations? Because you could be saying all the right affirmations, doing all the right visualizations. But if the observer behind those practices is vibrating with lack, fear, or cognitive dissonance, you're not collapsing the desired outcome. You're confirming its absence. The collapse mechanism isn't verbal. It's vibrational. The universe doesn't hear your words. It reads your frequency. And that frequency is set not by what you say, but by who's watching. Let's make this incredibly tangible. Every time you focus on an outcome like financial growth, relationship harmony, or a new identity, you're pointing your awareness at a specific wave in the field. But that awareness only causes collapse when your internal structure is compatible with that frequency. This is why so many people experience temporary shifts that don't last. Because the observer was not sustained. They had a moment of clarity, but the identity behind it defaulted back to old coding. They collapsed a peak state, but couldn't hold the lens that created it. The most critical upgrade in reality engineering is not clarity of desire. It's stability of observer. When your observer holds coherence, meaning your identity, emotional baseline, and inner narrative are harmonized, then you don't force outcomes. They become inevitable. This is not law of attraction. It's law of resolution. Outcomes resolve into clarity through the field of coherence. They snap into form because the field recognizes that version of you as a match. Let's take this even further. You may think your choices are causing results. But in truth, the observer state preceding the choice is doing the heavy lifting. The version of you that decides, reacts, or perceives is actually the architect of the outcome, not the decision itself. Because the field doesn't respond to your action. It responds to the structure of awareness that produces it. That's why two people can make the same move, launch the same business, say the same phrase, walk the same path, and experience radically different feedback from reality. It's not effort. It's encoding. The observer encodes the act, and the act broadcasts that code into the quantum field. So if you want better results, you don't start by changing what you're doing. You start by changing who is watching the process unfold. That's why manifestation is broken for most people. Because it assumes the self is a constant, and reality is the variable. But that's not how it works. Reality is the mirror. Identity is the variable. And until the variable stabilizes, the mirror can only reflect chaos. Now that you understand this quantum-level influence of the observer, you're ready to begin the rewiring process itself. We now move into the first of 3 hidden identity shifts that instantly change your field. It's subtle. It's often misunderstood. But it's the difference between chasing outcomes and selecting them. The more you search, the more you affirm you don't have it. But selectors? They collapse timelines. To rewire your observer, the first hidden transformation is a shift from seeker to selector. At first glance, these may sound similar. Both imply a movement toward something. But energetically, they are exact opposites. The seeker operates from desire. The selector operates from decision. The seeker is broadcasting a lack by definition, because to seek is to confirm that something is missing. And here's the quantum reality. The observer that broadcasts lack collapses absence. Every time you say, I want. Every time you say, I need. Every time you search with your inner narrative. You're reinforcing a timeline where the desired outcome exists somewhere else. And your observer stabilizes you in the version of self that does not have it. That's the trap. Now contrast that with the selector. The selector doesn't operate from lack. The selector operates from alignment. There is no reaching, no hoping, no searching, only recognizing what's already available in the field, and choosing to stabilize the identity that matches it. This is why some people move effortlessly into outcomes that others struggle with for years, because selectors collapse reality with precision. They are coherent. They are resonant. They are not chasing. They are claiming. Let's break it down further. The seeker needs proof. The selector is the proof. The seeker relies on external feedback to validate their path. The selector generates feedback by changing their frequency. This is not mindset fluff. It's energetic architecture. Your identity has a signal. That signal either matches the timeline you want or it doesn't. If it does, reality shifts. If it doesn't, reality repeats. Think of your identity like a tuning fork. You don't chase a sound. You match its frequency and let resonance do the work. That's what selection really is. Tuning into a version of reality so precisely that the field has no option but to mirror it. So how do you know if you're a seeker or a selector? Here are the patterns of the seeker. Constant questions. How do I make this happen? Obsession with signs and synchronicities. Reliance on outside validation to stay motivated. Emotional roller coasters tied to perceived progress or lack thereof. A low tolerance for the unknown. Now the patterns of the selector. Neutral anticipation, not desperate hope. Minimal cognitive noise around the outcome. Emotional congruence with the desired state, even before it's visible. Clarity that the field reflects them, not the other way around. Stable identity regardless of feedback. The shift from one to the other isn't about pretending. It's about reformatting your observer. That means asking better questions. What version of me already aligns with this outcome? How can I stabilize that state before anything changes externally? Where am I still acting like a seeker, hoping, waiting, grasping, rather than selecting? The truth is, the outcome you want may already exist, but it can't stabilize until the observer within you stabilizes. And that only happens when the seeking ends. When identity stops chasing and begins claiming, you collapse what you believe yourself to already be. Not what you want to become. Not what you hope will arrive. But what your frequency already reflects as truth. So the first hidden shift is this. Stop manifesting from a space of want. Start resolving from a space of alreadiness. This is the core difference between wishful thinking and timeline selection. A selector is not more positive. A selector is more precise. They tune their observer to the exact state that the desired timeline responds to. And when they hold it unchanging, unwavering, unapologetically, reality doesn't negotiate, conforms. Next, we'll unlock a second hidden shift, one that challenges one of the most sacred assumptions in personal transformation, and reveals why healing may be the very thing keeping your old identity alive. Healing can become a trap because what if you're healing a self that doesn't need to exist anymore? For years, the self-help world has told you that before you rise, you must repair, that every block must be cleared, that every wound must be excavated, that only a thoroughly healed version of you can access the next level. This belief has become sacred. unquestioned, preached as absolute. But here's the brutal truth. Healing can become self-preservation for the wrong self. And if the observer within you is clinging to that identity, the broken one, the unworthy one, the one constantly working on itself, you will keep collapsing timelines that support it. The healer self is noble, empathetic, driven by understanding and wholeness, but it is still operating within a closed loop. I am not there yet. I must first fix this. I carry something that keeps me from being whole. Even if those beliefs are expressed gently or positively, they are still being broadcast as identity signals. And the field responds accordingly. The healing never ends, because the self doing the healing must continue to exist for the process to make sense. Let's reframe everything. There is a difference between healing pain and preserving the identity that came from it. There is a difference between resolving emotional debt and endlessly circling the same stories out of habit. The quantum field does not reward suffering with breakthrough. It rewards precision with alignment, the observer state that keeps diagnosing itself, looping through awareness of dysfunction, rehearsing new ways to repair, is collapsing outcomes where that process continues. This is not evolution. It's recursive identity validation. You're building temples to past versions of you and calling it progress. Now contrast that with the architect. The architect isn't preoccupied with healing the old blueprint. The architect is busy building a new one. They don't need to resolve every glitch in the past identity because they no longer observe reality from that version of self. They don't need perfect closure, perfect emotional processing, or perfect karmic recalibration. They simply shift observers and collapse from a new design. This is the quantum advantage. In the field of infinite possibility, you do not have to earn evolution. You only have to observe from a new state. This is the identity shift from healer to architect. Let's break this down. The healer self often runs on subconscious loops. Once I'm whole, I'll be ready. Once I understand the wound, I'll be free. Once I forgive enough, I'll unlock abundance. But underneath these is a binding statement. I am still broken. You may not say it. You may not believe it on the surface. But the field reads your observer state, not your conscious declarations. Every repetition of the healing process embeds a message. This version of me is still the core identity. So the field returns confirmation. Yes, that is who you are. Here is more material to process. Here is more reason to stay in your loop. The architect plays a different game. Instead of asking, what needs to be healed? They ask, what version of me already matches my next reality? Instead of analyzing the past, they encode the future. Instead of breaking down the old, they stabilize the new. Because architects understand a powerful truth. You don't need to evolve what no longer needs to exist. You can let it collapse and build from coherence instead. So what does it actually look like to embody the architect state? It begins with design-level thinking. Ask yourself, what identity template corresponds to the timeline I choose to inhabit? What beliefs, emotional tones, and expectations would that self hold by default? How can I stop reinforcing the outdated observer, even through self-care or spiritual routines, and anchor into the one that reflects where I'm going? This isn't bypassing. This is precision. Because healing without replacement is just perpetual renovation. And the universe doesn't respond to your need for recovery, it responds to your current encoding. So instead of retrofitting your past self, you become fluent in coding your next one. Let's go further. The architect doesn't personalize resistance. They don't ask, why am I still blocked? They ask, what observer state is resolving this version of the field? They don't fear old triggers, they render them irrelevant. Because the new identity has no context for the old pattern. They don't wait to be free of their wounds to take new action. They assume a new posture and let resonance handle the rest. This is why some people quantum leap so fast that others can't keep up. Because they don't heal their way forward. They select an identity that has no wounds to reconcile. Not through denial, through displacement. They no longer project awareness into the broken self. So it dissolves. It is no longer observed. And in quantum terms, what is no longer observed ceases to exist. That's the real shift. Stop keeping your past self on life support through endless personal development. Stop rewarding yourself for emotional endurance. Stop reinforcing the healer identity as your baseline. The healing happened, or it didn't. It doesn't matter anymore. What matters now is this. Are you observing your current field through the lens of a version of you that is still in recovery? Or through the lens of the one who already exists in the timeline you say you want? One leads to endless cycles. The other leads to collapse and reformation. Only one is compatible with the quantum field. And only one builds realities instead of treating old ones. You are not here to endlessly patch the cracks. You are here to code new structure. Next, we will enter the third hidden shift, the one that moves you from passive witness to active frequency generator. The transformation from observer to oscillator. Passive observation collapses possibilities. Rhythmic resonance commands them. Up until now, we've examined how the identity of the observer shapes which timelines become real. That understanding is crucial. But it only brings us halfway into the actual mechanics of quantum influence. Because at the core, you are not just an observer. You are a field generator. And once you shift from observing passively to emitting intentionally, you become something far more powerful, an oscillator. This shift is often missed because it's easy to over-intellectualize manifestation. You learn about belief. You study identity. You understand frequency. But frequency isn't a concept. It's a rhythm. It's an output. And unless you're generating rhythm in harmony with your chosen reality, no amount of knowledge will replace the transmission you're lacking. Oscillators don't just observe the field, they shape it in real time. Let's define this clearly. An observer looks at the field and collapses a timeline based on identity. An oscillator emits a stable vibrational pattern that modifies the surrounding field itself. One reacts, the other configures. One matches existing probability. The other recalibrates probability through energetic influence. This is the difference between waiting for the mirror to reflect what you want versus broadcasting the signal that forces the mirror to change its shape. Oscillators bend the field. And what gives the oscillator that power? Resonance. When your inner state holds rhythmic consistency, when your thoughts, emotions, physiology, and beliefs are vibrating in coherence, you generate a signal strong enough to override ambient field noise. This signal then attracts configurations, events, and identities that match it. Not because you wanted them, but because the field had no choice but to stabilize around that frequency. Think of reality as a malleable medium. Most people walk through it unconsciously, bumping into outcomes, reacting to what appears, observing it with emotion, then reinforcing it. But oscillators emit. They radiate a constant waveform, one that is tuned to a specific timeline. And as they continue emitting, the field reorganizes. This isn't magic. It's entrainment. Weak signals follow strong ones. Lower amplitudes synchronize with higher ones. Disorganized fields become structured when exposed to coherent rhythms. You're not manipulating anything. You're simply broadcasting identity at such consistency that reality adjusts itself to mirror your internal broadcast. The shift to becoming an oscillator requires one major commitment: energetic steadiness. This isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about stabilizing your signal underneath all fluctuations. Your frequency becomes your root identity. You don't wobble with the world. You anchor it. And when your observer identity becomes an oscillator identity, you collapse not just what's probable, but what's commanded by coherence. Here's what most miss. You already oscillate, but for most, the rhythm is scattered. Conflicting thoughts, emotional reactivity, inconsistent belief structures. So the field receives noise. Oscillators transmit harmony. They eliminate contradiction in their signal. That means your narrative must match your action. Your emotions must match your thoughts. Your choices must reinforce, not contradict, your baseline frequency. This is frequency embodiment. And once it's held consistently, timelines bend. Not through effort, Through inevitability. Here's how you know you've shifted from observer to oscillator. Your environment begins shifting without effort. People start responding to you in entirely new ways. Coincidences occur in direct proportion to your emotional state. You experience fewer tests and more confirmations. Your outcomes feel like harmonics, not goals. Because the field is no longer asking, "What do you want?" It's responding to, "What are you broadcasting?" Oscillators don't guess. They transmit. They know who they are. And the field aligns. Next, we expose the nature of identity itself, not as a personality but as a frequency pattern. And why tuning your internal coherence matters more than any belief, affirmation, or mindset practice combined. You're not your traits, you're your tunings. The modern self-help world has glamorized personality. Tests, archetypes, attachment styles, shadow traits. Millions of people define themselves by these categories. But in the quantum field, none of that matters. The universe doesn't register your personality. It registers your pattern. And your pattern is vibrational, tonal, waveform. Your identity is not a fixed set of qualities. It is not your habits, likes, or history. It is the coherence of your internal resonance. That resonance either matches specific timelines or cancels them out. It either stabilizes desirable outcomes or deflects them before they can arrive. You are not broadcasting who you are through your personality. You are broadcasting where you're tuned through your pattern. And the field responds to pattern. Always. So what defines your frequency pattern? It's not a single thought. Not an emotion you're feeling today. Not the story you tell yourself in the mirror. It's the overall harmony or dissonance between these four things: belief structures, your default assumptions about what's possible, safe, and expected. Emotional tone, the dominant flavor of your inner state, not your peaks, but your baseline. Cognitive narratives, the internal scripts you replay consciously or not. Energetic consistency, how reliably those three aspects hold together under pressure. When these components align, you create coherence. And coherence is the signature the quantum field reads. The stronger the coherence, the stronger the signal. The stronger the signal, the more selective your interaction with timelines becomes. Now let's reframe something that most people misunderstand. You've been told to be authentic, but authenticity isn't the goal. It's a side effect of coherence. When your beliefs, emotions, and thoughts are in sync, you feel authentic. When they're not, you feel fragmented. And fragmentation leads to scrambled signal noise. Noise confuses the field, cancels out potential. You don't receive what you desire. You receive what you vibrationally confirm through pattern repetition. That's the quiet tragedy most never notice. They claim clarity, but broadcast chaos. They rehearse confidence, but emit contradiction. They affirm success, but pattern fear. And so the field collapses timelines of more noise, more proof of delay, more loops of energetic feedback that reflect the pattern, not the words. This is why personality-based transformation stalls. Because personality is a label. Pattern is a frequency. And only frequency communicates with the quantum field. Let's make this even more practical. Two people can both believe in abundance. One receives it, the other doesn't. Why? Because one of them feels abundant, speaks like they expect abundance, acts as if abundance is default, and emits it consistently. The other one simply believes in abundance, but their emotional tone, inner narrative, and energetic consistency say otherwise. The field does not honor beliefs in isolation. It honors pattern integration. That means your frequency must be felt, repeated, entrained, and held. Not once, consistently. So how do you begin forming a coherent identity pattern? First, you stop trying to act like a different version of yourself. You start becoming a tuning system. Tuning means regulating your inner harmonics so that they no longer contradict each other. So that your identity emits a steady tone, no distortion, no countersignals. That's how you attract with clarity. That's how you influence the field without force. That's how you become a selector by default. It's not about becoming a new person. It's about stabilizing a new pattern. You can speak all day about success. But if your nervous system is tuned to fear, that's the pattern. You can affirm love in the mirror. But if your emotions signal rejection, that's the pattern. You can visualize daily. But if your thoughts spiral when the outcome is uncertain, that's the pattern. And that's the version of you the field recognizes. The one whose pattern matches a timeline, not the one whose thoughts desire it. Here's how to begin shifting your identity pattern in real terms. Audit your coherence. Are your beliefs, emotions, thoughts, and energy speaking the same language? Identify contradictions. Where do you say one thing and feel another? Restructure baseline tone. Elevate your emotional set point, not just in peak states, but as a daily anchor. Refine your inner dialogue. Strip out narratives that don't match the identity you want to broadcast. Build energetic consistency. Hold your chosen frequency during uncertainty, not just when things go your way. That's how you tune identity like an instrument. That's how you form a signature the field can lock onto. And the more coherent your signal, the more selective your reality becomes. Your pattern doesn't just affect what shows up. It controls what becomes available to show up. Timelines exist only when your observer frequency renders them as options. If your pattern doesn't match, the opportunity is invisible, not hidden from your eyes, but excluded from your field of interaction. This is timeline exclusion by default, and it's happening every moment. So stop focusing on whether your personality fits your goal. Stop asking whether you feel like the type of person who. The field doesn't care about type. Cares about tuning. You are either resonant, or you're not. You are either coherent, or you're scrambling. You are either stabilized, or you're flickering through identities. Your outcomes reveal your pattern. And once you shift from personality labels to frequency mastery, you no longer wait for breakthroughs. You broadcast them into inevitability. Next, we will expose how outcomes don't arrive, they collapse. And reveal the mechanics of why some timelines converge instantly while others never activate at all. Outcomes don't arrive, they collapse. So what makes one version of you win the resolution? There's a common misconception that the future is something you move toward. That timelines stretch in front of you like a path, and as you walk, you eventually reach them. But the quantum field doesn't operate on distance. It operates on proximity of vibration. Timelines don't arrive through effort. They collapse into the present based on one key factor: resonance. And resonance is not about willpower. It's about precision. You don't move toward timelines. You align with them, and once alignment is sufficient, the timeline collapses into now. So let's ask the real question. Why do some outcomes show up instantly while others delay or vanish? Because timelines aren't activated by your desire. They're activated by the observer state that matches their frequency signature. You can want something desperately, but if the version of you observing the field is not tuned to that outcome, that timeline remains uncollapsed, a wave of potential, not a point of reality. That's the brutal beauty of quantum mechanics. Only what matches stabilizes. Everything else remains probability. So what causes a timeline to collapse? Clarity, coherence, stability. These three components function like the coordinates that lock a potential into place. Clarity is knowing the exact state you are selecting. Coherence is aligning your full identity pattern with that state. Stability is holding that pattern long enough for the field to reflect it. When these elements are synchronized, the timeline has no option but to collapse into experience. This is not metaphysical fluff. This is energetic geometry. You become structurally compatible with a version of reality, so the field stabilizes it into form. Now let's look at what blocks this process. The biggest enemy of timeline collapse is identity drift. This happens when your emotional state, cognitive narrative, or belief baseline fluctuates too often. You momentarily match the timeline, then fall out. You generate access, then close the gate. Every moment you switch observer states, you fracture the collapse process. Because the field doesn't lock into instability. It waits. It loops. It returns feedback to confirm what's consistent. This is why partial resonance gets you half-manifested results. Glitches, delays, cluttered synchronicity. You're sending yes with your mind, no with your emotions, and maybe with your energy, and the field stays unresolved. To collapse timelines deliberately, you must remove all contradicting signals. This is how high-precision alignment works. Know exactly what the version of you in that timeline feels like. Build your daily signal to match it before the outcome occurs. Neutralize reactions that pull you into dissonance. Rehearse the identity until it becomes default, not effortful but automatic. When this signal becomes dominant, the field must respond, because you've created the attractor pattern that locks the timeline into place. Here's where most fail. They mix timelines. They visualize a future self, but interact with the world as their current self. They speak success, but collapse into past reflexes when challenged. They aim for transformation, but waver in the presence of uncertainty. This splits the collapse. The field doesn't know what to stabilize, so it mirrors instability. Timelines respond only to unified signals. That's the actual mechanics of alignment. So here's the equation. Observer state plus identity precision plus emotional integrity plus sustained signal equals timeline collapse. Every piece must match, not perfectly, but consistently enough to form a pattern that overrides the noise. Because the field doesn't collapse probability by force. It collapses it by resonance. You're not chasing your future. You're tuning to the version of reality that already exists. And the version of you compatible with it is already encoded in the field. But you only meet that version when your current observer becomes structurally indistinguishable from it. Then, and only then, does the convergence occur. Then reality doesn't shift, you shift reality. Next, we unravel why your life may feel like it's repeating, and how unresolved identity echoes project reality holograms that trap you in patterns, until you break the loop. You're not stuck in a loop, you're projecting one. Let's start with a hard truth. If you found yourself reliving the same experiences, attracting the same types of people, hitting the same emotional walls, or ending up back where you started no matter how much effort you put in, this is not coincidence. And it's not just the universe testing you. It's a projection. More specifically, it's a reality hologram. A self-generated structure formed from unresolved identity fragments that are still being broadcast into the field. These fragments act like light on glass, bouncing off the unhealed, unseen, or unexamined parts of your observer self, and creating a repeating 3D image. That image is your life. And unless the internal projector is reprogrammed, the hologram will persist regardless of your intentions. You are not inside reality. You are inside a feedback field. That field responds not to your goals, not to your wishes, but to your internal structure. When that structure contains energetic redundancies, belief loops, emotional scars, reactive tendencies, they form energetic signatures. And those signatures get printed into the field again and again until they're replaced. So the relationships, financial conditions, health patterns, and emotional dynamics you keep seeing, they're not arbitrary. They're reflections, but not reflections of your desires. Reflections of your identity residue. The parts of you that haven't been rewritten. Let's be precise. A hologram forms when coherent light meets a partially reflective surface and splits. Part of the light moves forward. The rest is scattered. The interference pattern between these two waves creates a 3D image in space. Now, in consciousness terms, the coherent light is your present moment awareness. The partially reflective surface is your unresolved identity. The interference pattern is your lived reality. What you're seeing and living right now isn't the raw universe. It's the interference pattern created by who you think you are, layered over who you were, laced with energetic noise from unconscious loops. You are watching yourself distorted. You are interacting with versions of the past projected forward. You are trying to evolve inside a moving image made from your old encoding. This is the reality hologram. And until you change the inner projection, the pattern repeats. Here's where it gets more precise. The longer you've carried a belief, the the stronger its signal. The more emotionally charged a past event, the sharper the projection it produces. The more attention you give to the pattern, either in resistance or in justification, the more clearly the field reflects it. This is why awareness without replacement can make things worse. When you observe the pattern, but don't replace the observer, you feed energy into the very timeline you want to collapse. The field reads focus as reinforcement. So observing your limitation from your current self is not enough. You must observe your limitation from your next self, or else you'll project it forward again. Now consider this. Every interaction you have is filtered through your identity code. If that code expects criticism, it finds it. If that code expects betrayal, it attracts it. If that code expects lack, it collapses abundance into unreachable potential. The same event can occur, but two observers collapse it differently, because one is projecting from a cleaned lens, while the other is still tangled in holographic echoes. These echoes are recursive. They loop back unless cut, and the only way to cut them is not through understanding, but through identity transmutation. To stop repeating your past, you must do more than resist it. You must stop broadcasting it. This means ending your energetic relationship with the self that generated those conditions. And most importantly, withdrawing attention from patterns that no longer serve a purpose. Because every time you work on the old loop without replacing the version of you that lived it, you reinforce the code. You're not healing. You're reprojecting. That's why forgiveness, introspection, and shadow work sometimes keep the loop alive. They bring you back into contact with the very frequency you're trying to dissolve. But the quantum field doesn't respond to the story. It responds to the signal. So how do you interrupt a hologram? First, stop trying to fix the image. Start by locating the lens. Ask, what part of my current identity benefits from this loop continuing? What version of me expects this outcome by default? How am I emotionally entangled with this repeating narrative? Second, identify the emission vector. This is the energetic behavior or pattern that keeps reinitiating the hologram. Could be over-explaining yourself, expecting disappointment, shrinking in the presence of power, choosing misaligned relationships to validate old self-worth coding. You don't need to psychoanalyze these patterns. You need to remove the charge, because the charge is what projects. Finally, replace the projector. This is the hard part, not because it's difficult to understand, but because it requires non-negotiable identity death. The part of you that keeps repeating this pattern cannot be upgraded. It must be replaced, not healed, not honored, retired, because as long as the identity stays in place, it will keep requesting familiar mirrors, and the field will keep providing them, until a new observer begins generating a new structure, not from desire, but from coherence. This is how you erase the image, not by force, but by replacing the source. Once you stop observing from the wounded self, the wound stops appearing. Once you stop affirming the struggling version of you, the struggle loses resolution. You are not trapped. You're tuned. Change the tuner, and the signal vanishes. Next, we go even deeper beyond holograms into cognitive layers and reveal why your reality hasn't shifted, because the one doing the watching hasn't changed. It's time to meet the part of you that has silently controlled every outcome. The watcher behind the watcher. If you've never questioned the one doing the watching, you've never truly changed. There's a voice in your head. You may call it intuition, thought, reaction, judgment, guidance, or logic. Feels like you, but it's not you. It's your default observer identity. And this identity is not neutral. It's not just witnessing your life. It's interpreting it, filtering it, framing it, collapsing it, moment by moment. Most people live their entire lives without questioning this voice. They think because they're aware of their thoughts, they're free. But you are only free once you stop being merged with the internal observer. Until then, every shift is cosmetic. Every growth is a new outfit on the same avatar. If you want real transformation, timeline changing, outcome shifting, identity collapsing change, you must watch the watcher. Let's break it down. You don't just have thoughts. You have thoughts about your thoughts. You also have emotional responses to those thoughts. And behind those layers is an evaluator, a commentator, a subtle internal eye that is constantly framing your experience. That internal eye is your cognitive observer. It tells you what to believe, tells you what's possible. It tells you how to interpret an event. This observer is not just noticing the world. It is shaping your interaction with it. And unless you isolate it, you cannot evolve. Because it's that observer that keeps choosing the same interpretations, triggering the same feelings, making the same energetic choices. This is not about mindfulness. This is about observer detachment. Mindfulness teaches you to notice your thoughts. But noticing is not enough. You must go further. You must notice who is doing the noticing. You must break the feedback loop between the inner voice and your sense of self. Because as long as you're fused with that narrator, you're not choosing your identity. You're obeying it. Let's make it concrete. Say you encounter a delay in your plans. The external event is neutral, but your internal observer says, "Here we go again. This always happens to me. Maybe I wasn't meant for this." Those aren't just thoughts. They're framing devices, and they anchor you to the old version of self. Most people react emotionally to the thoughts, then try to change their emotion, without ever questioning the watcher that framed the event that way in the first place. They focus on how they feel, not on who made them feel that way. This is the missing link in identity shift. Until you disentangle from the internal observer, you are not creating your reality. You are performing a script that was handed to you by your default observer. So how do you watch the watcher? Step 1. Locate the lens. Ask, who is evaluating this right now? What tone does my inner observer use? What assumptions are baked into its commentary? Step 2. Interrupt the merger. Realize that the voice in your head is a tool, not a truth. It is one possible narrator, not an objective reporter. You can change narrators. You can upgrade the internal voice. You can override it with a new frequency of perception, but not until you recognize that it's optional. Step 3. Reassign observation. Choose a new cognitive position. Decide that from now on, you will observe your life from the identity of your chosen timeline, not the one that formed in your past. You will not respond to events from the narrator of delay, rejection, or limitation. You will respond from the identity you are stabilizing. That new observer is not emotionally attached to your old story. It sees neutral data. It chooses meaning that reinforces forward movement. This is how you reclaim sovereignty. You are not your thoughts. You are not your feelings. You are not even the awareness behind them. You are the chooser of frames. You are the one who can dislodge the old narrator and install a new lens of perception that collapses a new version of life. That's what it means to rewire the observer. Next, we will step into applied identity engineering, how to deliberately design the observer self that modifies the field around you, primes your next timeline, and commands a new energetic posture. Stop waiting for alignment. Design it into your being. Let's be clear. Alignment isn't a gift you receive after enough healing. It's not a reward for having the right mindset, the perfect morning routine, or a full moon ritual done in exactly the right way. Alignment is a structural phenomenon. It emerges when your internal systems, thoughts, emotions, expectations, and identity are engineered to emit a coherent field. That field, once stable, becomes directive. You no longer wait for reality to mirror your efforts. Reality bends because the observer doing the watching is now intentional by design. And this changes everything. Up until now, we've uncovered how the default observer, your unconscious self-narrator, is selecting outcomes on autopilot. We've exposed how that selection is based on old programming. We've dissected how patterns persist because the observer is embedded in them. Now we take full command, because the next level of transformation isn't about reacting to the world with better tools. It's about installing a new architect inside your mind. This means constructing the observer state that matches your chosen timeline. then maintaining it long enough for the quantum field to collapse around it. This isn't metaphor. It's mechanics. Let's define what an engineered observer state really is. It is a consciously built structure that includes a defined identity signal, a corresponding emotional baseline, a cognitive frame for interpreting stimuli, an energetic broadcast that remains stable under pressure. Once you encode these pieces into your awareness, your very presence becomes directive. You don't visualize change, you become the field generator of it. People feel it. Situations reconfigure. Paths open without effort. And that's because the field is responding to precision, finally. So how do you build this? The process begins with identity templating. Here's the misconception. People try to imagine who they want to be. They dream about the future version of themselves. But that dream remains abstract, untethered to structure. You must treat identity as architecture, and that requires coding your observer into a model that can hold energetic integrity. This model is your identity template. Start by asking, what version of me naturally lives in my desired outcome? How does that version of me think, feel, respond, interpret, and project energy? If I met that version of me today, would they recognize me as compatible or foreign? The answers to these questions give you the coordinates of your template. Now comes the build. Use these components. 1. Thought design. Strip out any narrative that contains indecision, apology, hesitation, or fear. The new observer speaks in resolved statements, not affirmations, identity declarations. Examples: I operate in clarity. I don't wait for signs. I emit them. My field tells reality how to respond. These are not slogans. They are structural statements, identity code that reinforces stability. 2. Emotional regulation. Choose your baseline frequency, then install it as a non-negotiable default. Joy is not always accessible, but neutrality, inner steadiness, anticipation without urgency, these can be trained. The observer you're designing must not wobble every time a data point contradicts the vision. Stability is resonance. And the more stable your frequency, the more immediate your feedback from the field. 3. Interpretive framework. Redesign your perception filters. Stop reacting from your current self. Start framing every event through the lens of the version of you who already owns the outcome. That means delays are upgrades in disguise. Resistance is proof of signal strength. Silence is recalibration, not abandonment. Your new observer doesn't flinch. It frames every input in a way that reinforces the chosen identity. 4. Energetic posture. Your posture, physical, emotional, relational, tells the field how to read you. Stand, speak, breathe, and move as if collapse has already occurred. Because energetically, the field mirrors not what you say, but what you are willing to stabilize. When these 4 components are harmonized, you've built a new observer state. And from that observer, new timelines become not just available, they become magnetically inevitable. Let's be honest. You won't maintain the new observer state by willpower alone. So build in automation protocols. This means embedding environmental triggers, sensory cues, and identity anchors into your life. Examples: a keyword you say silently when entering a room to activate your observer. An item you wear that symbolizes your new identity signal. A playlist or breath pattern that recenters your frequency when destabilized. These are not gimmicks. They are coding tools, reminders to keep your internal signal clean and your field coherent. The more you anchor your observer into physical space, the faster the field adjusts to it. And here's the real secret to maintaining observer integrity. Non-reactivity to lag. Sometimes your new signal will broadcast before the field updates. And in that gap, doubt creeps in. But engineered observers do not let external latency destabilize internal signal. They hold. They emit. They trust structural inevitability over visible evidence. That's where most collapse. They release too soon. They shift observers without realizing it. And the timeline reverts to old coding. Your job is not to make the outcome appear. Your job is to stabilize the identity that makes the outcome unavoidable. You are not reacting to life anymore. You are coding it. You are not asking the field for permission. You are assigning it structure through clarity, resonance, and precision. So design your observer. Make it beautiful. Make it specific. Make it coherent. And then let the field recognize itself through you. Next, we step into applied transformation, practical, real-time identity reset protocols that allow you to shift observer states instantly, hold resonance under challenge, and program your field with surgical precision. Want to change your reality now? Start by changing the I behind the thought. Everything you've learned means nothing if you can't apply it when it matters most. In the heat of the moment, in the middle of the challenge, in the quiet space when feedback is missing. So this is where it becomes real. Identity reset is not a ritual. It is not a morning practice alone. It is not a series of affirmations to repeat until your voice goes numb. It is the skill of switching observer states on command, rewriting your field response in real time, and collapsing the old self with precision, not emotion. This is the difference between thinking about transformation and becoming the transformer. And the moment you apply this in your daily life, you shift from student to signal. Let's begin with Protocol 1, Sensory Override. This protocol bypasses narrative and goes straight to the nervous system, because the fastest way to interrupt the default observer is through input interruption. Choose a sensory signal that marks the identity shift. It must be physical, specific, and instantly actionable. Examples: breath hold and release with intention. Cold exposure, hands under cold water while declaring your new state. Tactile cue, gripping your wrist, tapping your collarbone, pressing into your chest. These sensory inputs override the autopilot. They force the brain to re-engage, giving you the space to choose the new observer. When done with intention, these become microportals for identity reset. Protocol 2, Voice Pattern Reprogramming. Your voice doesn't just express thought, it imprints frequency. Speak out loud in the tone, cadence, and certainty of your chosen identity. Not to convince anyone, to install the rhythm. Even 10 seconds of speech can shift your internal state. Example: in moments of doubt, say with full breath and grounded presence, I am the field that commands this now. I stabilize the frequency. I don't wait for confirmation. This reality is a match to me, or it dissolves. Don't just say it. Be the frequency that speaks it. The sound of your voice becomes the shape of your field. Protocol 3, Inner Narrative Redirection. This protocol targets the cognitive loop behind your emotional reaction. Step 1, pause the thought. Literally say, stop. Step 2, ask, who is thinking this? Step 3, redirect the narrative to match your designed observer. Example: old thought, nothing's working, I'm off track. Interrupt, stop. Redirect, I don't measure by appearances. I measure by signal integrity. And I'm locked in. Repeat the new narrative 3 times. This isn't about belief, it's about installing the voice of your new observer so it becomes the default interpreter. Protocol 4, Quantum Journaling. This is not reflective journaling. It is signal reinforcement through language encoding. Write in the first person, present tense, as the observer you're becoming. Not what you want to be. Write from the identity that is already stabilized. Example entries: today I moved with certainty. My decisions were clean. The field responded to my tone. I maintained frequency despite external noise. That's who I am now. The signal is locked. I expect only aligned results. Do this daily, not to track progress, but to solidify the observer. Your pen becomes a transmitter. Your words form a vibrational imprint. Protocol 5, Resonance Rehearsal. This is the active practice of feeling the internal posture of your chosen identity. Close your eyes. Feel how the version of you who already lives the next timeline feels in the body. Their breath rhythm, their muscular tone, their focus level, their emotional steadiness. Rehearse holding this state for 90 seconds. Then return to it throughout the day. This is not visualization. It is somatic entrainment. You are teaching your system to match a new vibrational homeostasis. All 5 of these protocols are tools. Use them separately, combine them, stack them when the stakes are high, but most importantly, train them when the stakes are low. Because mastery isn't proven in crisis. It's built in the mundane. The more fluently you reset your observer, the less time you spend in unaligned feedback loops, and the more rapidly your field reflects who you've become. Next, we'll bring it all together with a closing activation, a clear summary of the 3 hidden identity shifts, a final challenge to your current observer, and an invitation to start collapsing your next reality from a space of conscious, coherent command. You don't become your next reality, you observe it into being. Right now, in this moment, there is no separation between you and your future. Not in space, not in time, only in frequency. And the frequency is determined by who's watching. Not the part of you that dreams. Not the part that works hard. Not the part that sets goals or journals about success. It's the part of you that selects which version of reality becomes real by the consistency of your internal structure. This is not metaphysical poetry. It's functional truth. And everything we've explored leads to one single power, the ability to choose the observer through which life unfolds. Let's remember where you started. You thought outcomes were shaped by desire. That clarity of intention would be enough. That persistence, positivity, or belief would eventually bend the world to your favor. But now you know something far more potent. Desire without identity collapse is noise. Belief without structural coherence is static. Effort without energetic precision is delay. Only the observer shapes reality. And you've now uncovered the 3 hidden identity shifts that instantly alter what the field mirrors back. You've seen how the seeker, in all their yearning, vision boarding, and striving, actually broadcasts absence, while the selector stabilizes reality through calm decision and clean frequency. You've understood that the healer, even in their sacred, well-intentioned work, keeps the wound alive through constant confirmation, while the architect ignores the glitch entirely and begins construction from new code. And you've stepped beyond passive awareness to see that the observer merely registers possibility. But the oscillator commands the collapse by generating coherent, rhythmic energy that reshapes the field itself. These aren't motivational metaphors. They're instructions, blueprints for becoming the version of you that reality responds to. Not because you asked, but because you became the frequency it had to obey. So now you stand at the threshold of choice, because every moment, starting right now, contains a decision. Who is watching when you react to a delay? Who is interpreting the data? The old self clinging to past wiring? Or the new observer who knows that lag is just proof of signal alignment being tested? When you speak to yourself in silence, what voice are you using? The one shaped by hesitation, self-protection, and inherited programming? Or the one you've chosen, crafted, installed as the architect of your new field? When you plan, when you move, when you breathe, are you still filtering life through the lens of your last version? Or have you initiated the frequency of your next one? Deliberate, coherent, stable? That's the question now, because that's the only thing that changes the field. The collapse doesn't wait for your effort to be good enough. It waits for your signal to be clean enough. Let's be blunt. There are infinite realities still in waveform around you. Success, impact, intimacy, expansion, peace, all hovering in the quantum field, waiting for a lock-in. But those timelines aren't attracted. They're selected, resolved, collapsed by the structural dominance of a frequency that matches them without contradiction. You don't become your next life by doing more. You become it by observing from the version of self that is already synonymous with it. So the question is not, what do I want? The question is, who must be watching for that to become real? And if the answer is clear, then your job is simpler than you thought. Kill the old watcher. Not gently, not with spiritual sentimentality, with precision. Replace it with a version of you that emits signal like law. That doesn't chase evidence because it knows it is the evidence. that doesn't fear delays because it recognizes its frequency is not optional, and thus the field must yield. This is not ego. This is clarity, because timelines collapse in favor of identity stability. And identity is nothing more than the sum total of who's watching and how that observer maintains signal under pressure. So let's finalize this. No fluff, no repeat affirmations, no abstract homework. Here is the activation protocol. Audit your observer. Right now. Not your goals. Not your fears. Look directly at the one doing the observing. Is it worthy of the timeline you claim to want? If not, acknowledge its limitations without judgment. Choose the replacement. Define the new observer. Its voice, its posture, its emotional regulation, its expectation of how life responds. Not the idealized self. The functional frequency match for the outcome you say is yours. Collapse the old frame. Use sensory, verbal, and narrative tools to remove the power from the outdated lens. Refuse to engage with it. Refuse to let it interpret. Refuse to believe anything it says, because it is not compatible with your chosen field. Stabilize the new observer. Anchor it with breath. Rehearse it in motion. Speak only through its voice. Expect resistance and hold anyway, because frequency isn't proven in ease. It's revealed in durability. Let the field adjust. Don't chase signs. Don't cling to proof. Hold signal. Maintain frequency. The timeline is already folding into you, but only if you don't shift the observer mid-collapse. This is the end of seeking, the end of healing what doesn't need to exist, the end of watching life with borrowed lenses. From here on, you are the selector, the architect, the oscillator. You don't wait for life to show you what's next. You become the version of self that the field has no choice but to reflect. You collapse possibility into precision by holding the only variable that ever mattered. Who is watching? So now ask yourself, clearly, directly, and without ceremony, right now, which version of you is doing the watching? And is that version qualified to command the timeline you're trying to live? If not, change the observer. Change it now. Collapse begins the moment the lens is chosen. And the field has already started listening.